State Senator Denny Hoskins and the Republican nominee for Secretary of State joins us now on the record. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
First of all, before we jump into this race facing you, I want to look back. This is our first time talking since you won a rather crowded primary. There were 8 Republicans running for this job. How do you assess the path to victory that you climbed in that race?
Most certainly, I think that I just outworked everybody. You know, my wife and I, between January and July of this year, we went to about 150 events across this great state. And I've said there's no city too big or town too small that we didn't visit and talk about my plan for election integrity in the Secretary of State's race.
What kind of Republican are you?
I'm a conservative Republican. You know, I'm a founding member of the Missouri Freedom Caucus, and I believe we should follow the Missouri Constitution as well as the GOP platform.
On this ballot, I have a sample ballot from St. Louis City in front of me here, 5 pages in all. That's printed on just one side of the page here. Amendment 7 is one here that asks about ranked choice voting.
That's right.
But it also puts in this question about citizenship and voting. Let's set that aside for a moment and focus on ranked choice voting. In the current incentive structure to elect someone, you have to do what you just did. Be the most Republican in the field of Republicans. Is that a healthy incentive structure to represent everybody in a district or a state?
Most certainly, I think so. You know, when we talked about being the most conservative Republican, I believe that I was the most conservative Republican, but I also believe that I outworked everyone. I went to so many more events than anyone else. I was outraised. I had about $300,000 to spend on a statewide race, which is $300,000 is a lot of money, but it's not a lot of money for a statewide race.
That's all successful in clearing the first hurdle.
That's right.
But my question is, how do you evolve into serving everyone in the state, Democrat, Independent, Libertarian, Republican alike? Because you made a lot of promises in a Republican primary. But now the job becomes serving everyone in the state, regardless of party affiliation. Can you do both?
I most certainly can do both. I believe that our elections should be safe and secure, and we need people that have confidence in our elections. You know, people have asked, why the Secretary of State? Why run for Secretary of State? Why is that important? And it all boils down to elections and having confidence in our elections. If we don't believe that our elections are safe and secure, then it doesn't matter who they say won. President, governor, Secretary of State, city council, school board, chaos will ensue. So I want to make sure that our elections are safe and secure.
And just doing the rough math here, you've been elected how many times?
I was elected 4 times as a state representative and twice as a state senator. So
I'm no accountant. That's 6 times.
Yes, 6 times.
Hope it going for 7.
Yes.
Did you trust those elections?
I did trust those elections. In fact, back in 2008, my first election, out of 14,000 votes cast, I won by 122 votes. And so we actually had a recount in my election. We went back and looked at those ballots individually.
And in every time, I just came back from the St. Louis County Election Board where early voting is already underway, and the election officials there, they use voting machines to tabulate, count the ballots. You don't trust those?
You know, I do have some concerns about the election machines, mainly, you know, most recently in June of 2024 in Puerto Rico, which is a territory of the United States, they had Dominion voting machines. And after the election, they weren't able to reconcile the difference between the election machines and the paper ballots. So I do have some concerns about the election machines. And most
in Puerto Rico?
Well, I mean, it's the same machine. Dominion voting machines are being used all over the United States as well.
And you understand the liability that broadcast outlets like Fox News took on when they ran wild with claims about what Dominion voting machines had to do with the outcome in 2020. Certainly you're not making those claims.
No, I'm not making those claims, but you know, like I said, most recently you can just Google Puerto Rico 2024 primary Dominion voting machines, and you see that, hey, they weren't able to reconcile those differences. And
that brings me to the point that the election commissioners in St. Louis County, the largest local election authority in the entire state, made to us just this week, which was, in every instance when they had to open up the voting machines, take out the paper ballots, and recount by hand the counts in close races that they already counted by machine, in every instance, they were not able to discern any distinguishable difference between the hand count and the machine count. Does that give you greater confidence that the machines worked properly?
Well, that does give me greater confidence. But, you know, we need to look at the election machines and make sure that they are accurately counting those. And when I've traveled across this great state, there's been a lot of voters here in the state of Missouri that have concerns about the election machines. And so we can look at, you know, maybe at the same time while we're going through the election machines and having those count the votes, also hand count those at the same time. I mean, we hand counted ballots for...
At the same time?
Yes, we've hand counted ballots for years and years and years. We've only had election.
Do you know why they went away from it?
About 20 years.
Do you know longer than that? Do you know why they went away from hand count to machines?
Well, they thought that it would be more accurate with machines.
There was a lot of fraud with hand counting. there was
Yes.
a lot of manipulation. People, election judges who could sneak in a little smudge on a ballot here and
Right.
spoil it, or they
Right.
could do. You're introducing a lot more risk, aren't you?
I don't believe so. There's risk no matter if you're hand counting ballots or if you have election machines. I mean, there's other countries that hand count ballots and turn around those same results or those results within one day.
The United Kingdom does that.
Yes, United Kingdom does that. Here in the state of Missouri, I mean, even in Johnson County, in Warrensburg, where I'm from, they had a special election in August of 2023. They had paper ballots. They hand counted those ballots. Osage County, in the municipal election in April of 2023, did paper ballots and hand counted those ballots. So I believe that it can be done.
Here we are.
did it for hundreds of years.
Sure, and we found problems there. So I want to reiterate
Yes.
that in every case, the ballots remain intact, available for hand recount in close races, and that's an important factor here.
It is.
But I want to ask you about this age of information and technology that we
Yes.
live in 2024. Some of the technological advances are fascinating. There's
Yes.
quantum computing, there's artificial intelligence.
Right.
We're doing all kinds of things we never could have imagined before. And you're saying, let's take all this computer machinery out of the system. Is there any other aspect or facet of your life where you would suggest doing something like that?
Well, you know, when we talk about hand counting ballots, you know, I believe that it is safer and secure, and because you can't, you know, it's no secret that, hey, we have Russia, we have China, we have North Korea trying to hack into our election systems
These
every day
computer
and software.
tabulators don't connect to the internet.
Yes, but they are electronic, and if you talk to any forensic expert, anything that's electronic can be hacked
A
into.
calculator is electronic. It has a little battery in it. That's electronic.
It could be, yes.
Couldn't be hacked, could it?
Well, a calculator is pretty simple and basic.
So are these machines, which you've inspected them, right? I would imagine.
I've not had a chance to inspect those. However,
No.
I have done a recount as far as in my election in 2008.
I'd recommend inspecting them with some local election officials. It's quite enlightening, the process.
Yes, I've been invited to do that, and we just haven't, unfortunately, had time to schedule that.
What do you value more, your vote or your money?
Vote.
Why?
Well, your vote is what we have. I mean, you want to make sure that every vote is safe and secure, that every vote counts, that every person has one vote, and that vote counts. And so that's why we want to make sure that our elections are safe and secure. You know, the state of Texas, they just audited their voter rolls and found 1 million ineligible voters on their voter rolls, including 6,500 non-citizens.
So you value your vote more than your money. I wonder if you would demonstrate that to us by deleting your banking app off your cell phone and going only to paper money. Say to your bank, I don't want you to use any electronics to transfer my funds. Don't scan my routing number. Don't do any electronics or computing. I want you to use just paper money. Would you do that right here today?
I've actually been hacked into as far as my debit card and credit card before, where they've used those numbers. And sometimes I think it would be better to go back to the old ways. You wouldn't have to worry about these computer hackers and scammers trying to hack into your credit card or bank account.
So, and that's true because those are connected to the internet.
That's right.
There is more risk there on that front. But you're making an interesting point. Okay, so let's talk about how it impacts the voter. If election officials, many of whom work long days
Yes.
in this election season, are tasked with hand counting, I don't know if you'd like to count how many of these ballots you think you could count in a 6-hour span. How long would we have to wait in Missouri to see the results?
I don't think we'd have to wait too much longer than we already have to wait right now. I mean, I think that voters want to make sure that our votes and elections are safe and secure and accurate more than they want to see them become efficient. Now,
Let me explain a piece of the practical workflow there, which I think you know. Election officials have 5 days.
Yes.
They have 2 weeks for people to come in and cast their vote into the machine for 2 weeks in a single file line.
That's right.
Then they have 5 days to start opening ballots and sliding those mail ballots into the machines as well. None of the actual counting in the computer takes place until polls close, but all the prep work is done. All the man hours are
Right.
already done. You'd be backloading all of that to only begin after 7 p.m.
Well, I think that we can start taking a look at whether absentee ballots that are already at the county clerk's office, starting to count those on the morning of election day. I'm not for sure why exactly we have a rule where you can only start counting after the election is closed.
Because you don't want any one person to be tempted with leaking the information about X number of votes coming from this county or X amount of turnout coming from this port. That gives some campaign a possible avenue to a leg up, to drive their turnout here, drive their turnout there. It wouldn't be fair. That's why.
Well, obviously, if you started counting votes the day of the election, starting at 6 a.m. when polls open, I think it would be very difficult to all of a sudden get all those votes out and tell the public, hey, we need more Republican votes here, we need more Democrats votes there.
I've got to introduce you to some more political operatives. There are some pretty competitive folks in that space.
There are some pretty savvy ones, I agree.
Okay, so we're talking about the operation. I want to talk now about the implementation. Do you think you have any avenue to return to hand counting ballots in Missouri other than changing the law?
No, most certainly. As Secretary of State, the Secretary of State cannot mandate hand counting of ballots. That can only be done by the legislature or the individual county clerks.
So you have to persuade a lot of your former colleagues.
Yes,
current colleagues.
That's right. That's right. I'd have to persuade some of my current colleagues, hopefully former colleagues, this next legislative session. I know some of my colleagues have talked about hand counting ballots, and they plan on introducing that legislation. And as far as the county clerks go, I've said that currently in Missouri state statute, it has Missouri state statute on how to hand count ballots. That is currently in Missouri state statute on what to do, the proper process and procedures. So it's nothing new that we haven't done for hundreds of years before this. But the Secretary of State can't mandate that. That, like I said, it can only come from the legislature or the individual county clerks.
We've talked a lot about elections. Let's switch gears a little bit. You're still a state senator.
Yes.
And when Missouri voters read the headlines about Denny Hoskins, they probably most commonly see his name right alongside stories about sports betting.
Yes.
And that's a question on voters' ballots.
That's right.
This November.
Yes.
How should they vote?
You know, I've got some concerns. You're talking about Amendment 2 to legalize sports betting here in the state of Missouri. I've got some concerns about Amendment 2. I think that there's not enough money in there for problem compulsive gambling. When I've talked
$5 million a year.
Yeah, when I've talked to Problem Compulsive Gambling Association, they say they need at least $10 million. If Amendment 2 passes, each casino in net revenue, not gross revenue, but net revenue after they paid out any bets and paid for expenses stands to make at least $25 million more in net revenue. And so I've always been a proponent to say that, hey, if casinos are going to make $25 million more net income, then surely they can afford $10 million to help pay for any problems that it causes.
Didn't legislators miss the boat? Because you could have written that into the law.
Yes, and in my version of sports betting bills, it had that in there. It had $10 million, and unfortunately, that was one of the hiccups. I wanted a higher tax rate. I think the fees are very low in Amendment 2, as well as the tax rate's very low when we compare that to other states.
That's what happens when industry writes the amendment.
That's right. That's what happens when industry writes the amendment. But unfortunately, we could not get that bill through the Senate.
A lot of the narrative in the common media narrative has been distilled down to Senator Hoskins was the linchpin in opposing the passage of sports betting. Is there something in that messaging that misunderstands your position?
Oh, most certainly. You know, the bill that passed out of the House and came over to the Senate, it was Senator Hageman. I guess that was 3 years ago. He actually was the handler of the sports betting bill in the Senate. He and I came to an agreement, but he was the handler. He's the one that would have to bring it up on the Senate floor, and he said the casinos and professional sports teams didn't agree to our agreement. So unfortunately, he would not bring that bill up. But I thought that was a good compromise that had a reasonable tax rate that put enough money in for problem compulsive gambling and would actually provide some revenue to the state for our veterans as well as education.
In the last 60 seconds or so that we have here, I want to go back to elections. Who won the presidential election in 2020?
Well, I believe that the election was stolen in 2020. And
of course, you don't have any evidence to support that.
Well, here's why. Because in many states, they did not follow the proper election law. And so when we talk about how, when, and where elections occur,
you're talking about Pennsylvania.
They changed, yes.
Where the courts allowed.
They changed many of those, and it did not go through the legislature. And so you had
because
of COVID.
Right.
Because of COVID, yes, because of COVID.
And so each ballot, but you don't question that the ballot was filled out properly by a registered voter and that it was traceable and it was verifiable.
I think that it was, but I think between how, when, and where those ballots were filed, because of COVID, because they changed the rules of the game, that's why we have good election laws here in the state of Missouri as far as when you can vote, how you can vote, and where you can vote. I mean,
do you think that issue has been rightfully and thoroughly vetted in court?
I do not. I don't think that issue's been, I mean, they allowed certain things that, you know, in order to, laws should not be easy to pass. And so they did some emergency rules in other states, the state of Pennsylvania, that didn't go through the legislature. And I think that those changes should have gone through the legislature.
All right, and I said last question last time. This time is the last question. Right. Why is this race between you and Barbara Pfeiffer, the Democrat running for Secretary of State, what's at stake for voters as they walk into the ballot box?
Well, most certainly. You know, in 2022, I fought to make sure we passed the bill that said you had to have photo ID. My opponent does not believe in a photo ID for voting. She thinks that that's racist. Also, some of the
Because
funding.
people of color often don't have as much access. There's a lower percentage of people that have a voter ID, to fill out the context there.
Well, I mean, you have to have a photo ID almost for anywhere. If you go to a bank, if you have order new cable service and they come to your home, they want to see a photo ID. So we provided the opportunity for anybody to get a photo ID free of charge, one photo ID. And then also, unfortunately, some of the funding for our public libraries actually comes through the Secretary of State's office. And unfortunately, in some of our public libraries, there's X-rated material in the kids section. I believe that we should withhold those funds for any of those public libraries that have X-rated material in the kids section. It's not appropriate for kids. You wouldn't take your 10-year-old daughter to a rated R movie, where my opponent voted, or she believes that that's fine.
Senator Hoskins, thank you for your time.
Yep, thank you.